How to learn words. Mia felt a familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. English, for her, was a beautiful but intimidating fortress. She devoured grammar books and endless vocabulary lists, yet when it came to speaking, her tongue tied itself into a hopeless tangle. The desire to communicate freely burned within her, a silent frustration. She knew the words, but they refused to leave her lips. Her initial study plan seemed straightforward enough. Memorize 100 words daily, repeat phrases, and watch educational videos. However, this isolated approach left her feeling disconnected from the real ebb and flow of conversation. She understood the rules, yet applying them spontaneously felt like deciphering an ancient, forgotten code. True fluency remained an elusive dream. One day, Mia stumbled upon a language learning community online. There, she discovered an entirely different philosophy: English study should be a dynamic plane for talking. It wasn't just about accumulation, it was about activation. The focus shifted from passive intake to active output, a concept that immediately resonated with her silent struggles. This realization marked a crucial turning point. She began to understand how people speak English, not just theoretically, but practically. It wasn't about perfect grammar from the start, but about conveying meaning, even with errors. This insight lifted a heavy burden from her shoulders. The pressure to be flawless was replaced by the freedom to simply try, to experiment with the language. The first step was acknowledging her fear of making mistakes. This fear often paralyzed her, silencing her voice before she even began. Mia realized that how to take first step for talking involved embracing imperfection, understanding that every uttered sound, correct or not, was a step forward, a vital part of the learning process. Her new strategy began with a focus on how to learn words more effectively. Instead of rote memorization, she started associating new vocabulary with images, personal experiences, and example sentences. This contextual learning made words stick, transforming them from isolated data points into usable tools for expression, ready for activation. She also incorporated active listening into her daily routine. This wasn't just passive background noise. Mia actively tried to discern intonation, common phrasal verbs, and natural speech patterns. She paid close attention to how native speakers connected words, noticing the rhythm and melody of spoken English. Listen and practice became her new mantra. After listening to a short dialogue, she would pause and try to mimic the speakers, attempting to replicate their pronunciation and pace. This immediate imitation helped her internalize sounds and structures, bridging the gap between comprehension and actual articulation, a crucial bridge. For her English talking practice, Mia started talking to herself in front of a mirror. Describing her day, narrating her actions, or even having imaginary conversations became her secret training ground. This low-pressure environment allowed her to experiment with sentence structures and vocabulary without the fear of judgment. She also started recording herself. Listening back to her own voice, while initially uncomfortable, provided invaluable feedback. She could identify areas for improvement in pronunciation and intonation, and celebrated small victories when she noticed progress. This self-assessment accelerated her confidence in speaking considerably. The next crucial step in her way of learning English involved finding speaking partners. She knew she needed real interaction. Online language exchange platforms became her hunting ground, searching for individuals willing to talk and share their language journey, opening up a world of collaborative practice. How to talk to people in pairs was a challenge at first. Her heart pounded before every video call. But she reminded herself that everyone starts somewhere. She prepared simple questions and topics, focusing on initiating conversations rather than waiting for perfection, pushing through the initial discomfort. Her first few pair sessions were hesitant, filled with pauses and fumbled words. Yet, she persevered. Her partners were often patient and encouraging, understanding her struggles. This positive reinforcement gradually chipped away at her ingrained shyness, making each subsequent conversation slightly easier and more natural. Mia learned the importance of active listening in these conversations, not just for comprehension, but for formulating her responses. She focused on understanding the gist of what was said, rather than getting stuck on every unfamiliar word, which allowed for a more fluid exchange. She realized that improving her fluency wasn't about speaking fast, but about speaking smoothly and clearly. It meant reducing hesitation, finding the right words without excessive searching, and connecting her thoughts seamlessly. This focus on flow, rather than speed, was a revelation in her journey. Gradually, her vocabulary became more accessible. Words she had previously only recognized in print now readily came to mind during conversations. This transformation felt magical, a direct result of her contextual learning and consistent activation through speaking practice, cementing her knowledge. She also started noticing common English idioms and phrasal verbs in authentic contexts. Instead of memorizing them in isolation, she saw how they were used naturally by others, integrating them into her own speech when appropriate. This made her language sound more natural. The fear of making mistakes began to recede significantly. She understood that mistakes were not failures, but stepping stones. Each grammatical error or mispronounced word became a learning opportunity, a data point for future improvement, rather than a cause for embarrassment. This newfound perspective was central to how to make confidence in speaking. Confidence wasn't something you waited for, it was something you built through consistent action, even small, imperfect actions. Every brave attempt, no matter how minor, added another brick to her confidence wall. Mia also diversified her English study plane for talking by joining online discussion groups on topics she was passionate about. This allowed her to engage with English in a more authentic and enjoyable way, moving beyond structured lessons into organic communication, making learning fun. She found that discussing hobbies or current events made the conversations more engaging and less like a formal lesson. This natural context encouraged her to express herself more freely, drawing upon vocabulary relevant to her interests, making the practice highly personalized. Her fluency continued to improve as she embraced the iterative nature of language learning. It wasn't a linear progression but a spiral, revisiting concepts with greater depth each time. Every conversation was a chance to refine, experiment, and grow, a continuous process. Mia diligently followed the listen and practice cycle. She watched English movies and TV shows without subtitles, then rewatched scenes, imitating the dialogue. This active engagement with authentic content sharpened her ear and improved her natural rhythm of speech, deepening her immersion. She realized that understanding how people speak English involved recognizing colloquialisms and slang, not just formal language. This nuanced understanding came from observing native speakers in casual settings, helping her sound less like a textbook and more like a real person. Taking the first step for talking became less daunting. What once felt like jumping off a cliff now felt like stepping across a small puddle. The accumulated small victories gave her the courage to initiate conversations herself, rather than just respond. Her way of learning English evolved from a solitary pursuit into a highly interactive journey. She understood that language was inherently social, meant for connection, not just consumption. This shift in mindset transformed her entire approach to mastery, making it dynamic. The English talking practice sessions became increasingly spontaneous. She no longer needed to meticulously plan every sentence. Her brain started making connections faster, retrieving words and grammar structures almost instinctively, a sign of her growing fluency and comfort. She discovered the joy of expressing complex ideas, even if she had to paraphrase or use simpler language sometimes. The goal was effective communication, not academic perfection. This pragmatic approach made speaking less stressful and more enjoyable. To improve her fluency further, Mia started summarizing articles or podcast episodes aloud in English. This forced her to condense information and articulate her thoughts coherently, strengthening her ability to convey ideas concisely and clearly without hesitation. She also focused on intonation and stress patterns, realizing they were crucial for conveying meaning and emotion in English. Listen and practice involved mimicking not just words, but the emotional tone behind them, making her speech more expressive and natural. Mia regularly reviewed her notes on how to learn words, focusing on high-frequency vocabulary and phrases relevant to her daily life. This targeted approach ensured that her active vocabulary grew efficiently, empowering her to discuss a wider range of topics. She noticed that confidence in speaking stemmed from a combination of preparation and acceptance. Preparing for common scenarios helped, but equally important was accepting that mistakes would happen, and they were part of the journey, not roadblocks. The process of how to talk to people in pairs became immensely rewarding. These interactions were not just practice, they were genuine cultural exchanges, broadening her perspective and making the language feel alive and relevant to global connections. Mia started noticing how people speak English in different registers: formal, informal, professional. This adaptability became a new goal. She practiced adjusting her tone and vocabulary depending on the context and audience, showing versatility. Every small success, from correctly ordering coffee to participating in a lively debate, fueled her motivation. These real-world applications of her English study plan for talking reinforced her belief that her efforts were truly paying off, visible progress. She kept a language journal, not just for new words, but for reflections on her speaking experiences. She celebrated breakthroughs and analyzed challenges, turning setbacks into lessons, further solidifying her commitment and providing tangible proof of her growth. Her approach to English talking practice became more varied. She engaged in role-playing, debated with herself, and even tried to think entirely in English, pushing her brain to process information directly in the target language. Mia understood that fluency wasn't an endpoint, but a continuous journey of refinement. There would always be new words to learn, new nuances to grasp. This perspective kept her motivated and curious, embracing the lifelong learning aspect of language. She particularly focused on phrases and chunks of language, rather than just individual words. This chunking method, a key part of her way of learning English, allowed her to produce more natural-sounding sentences without painstakingly constructing them word by word. The initial discomfort of taking the first step for talking had long vanished. Now, meeting new people and speaking English felt exciting, an opportunity to connect and share, rather than a scary hurdle to overcome, a true transformation. Her ability to listen and practice had sharpened significantly. She could now follow complex discussions and identify subtle inflections, which in turn improved her own pronunciation and intonation, making her sound much more like a native speaker. Mia realized that how to make confidence in speaking also involved being comfortable with silence. It was okay to pause, gather her thoughts, and formulate a coherent response. Silence didn't mean lack of knowledge, but thoughtful processing, a sign of maturity. She actively sought out opportunities to use English outside of formal practice. Volunteering for international events or simply navigating tourist areas became her spontaneous English study plane for talking, integrating learning into everyday life. Her understanding of how people speak English expanded beyond grammar to encompass cultural context and nonverbal cues. She learned to read body language and understand cultural nuances, making her communication more effective and empathetic. The consistent English talking practice, especially with various partners, exposed her to different accents and speaking styles. This diversity trained her ear and made her more adaptable, capable of understanding a wider range of English speakers, enhancing her global communication skills. Mia also focused on storytelling in English, starting with simple narratives about her day, then progressing to more elaborate personal anecdotes. This built her ability to organize thoughts and express them sequentially, a key aspect of fluency. To further improve her fluency, she started shadowing native speakers from podcasts, repeating their words almost simultaneously. This intensive listen and practice technique fine-tuned her pronunciation and rhythm, making her speech smoother and more natural sounding. Her journey demonstrated that how to learn words wasn't just about accumulation, but about active retrieval and application. The words needed to be constantly recycled through speaking and writing to become truly part of her active vocabulary, ready for spontaneous use. The way of learning English she adopted emphasized immersion and interaction over isolated study. It was a holistic approach that recognized language as a living, breathing entity, best learned through consistent, courageous engagement with others. Mia's transformation was remarkable. She now engaged in lively conversations, participated in online meetings, and even delivered short presentations, all in English. The once intimidating fortress had become her playground, a space of confident expression. She realized that how to make confidence in speaking came from a cycle of trying, learning, and improving. Each small success built momentum, reducing apprehension and increasing her willingness to take on more challenging speaking situations, a self-perpetuating positive cycle. Her ability to talk to people in pairs had evolved into genuinely meaningful connections. These partners became friends, and their shared language journey deepened their bond, proving the social power of consistent English practice. Mia understood that taking the first step for talking, repeatedly, was the most important lesson. It wasn't about being perfect, but about being brave enough to start, and then persistent enough to continue, regardless of setbacks. The initial question of how people speak English was no longer a mystery. She spoke English herself, not flawlessly, but effectively, with her own voice and style. She had found her unique place within the global English-speaking community, empowered and connected. Her English study plane for talking had indeed taken flight. From timid learner to confident communicator, Mia's journey was a testament to the power of consistent effort, active engagement, and the courage to simply open her mouth and speak, transforming her life.